Okay, well, over the last 33 years, Steve Blank has been a part of or co-founded 8 companies here in the Valley. He's a teacher at Berkeley, at the business school there, also at the Stanford Engineering School. He sits on boards, or sat on boards like Startup Weekend, also InView, and others. Let's give a big round of applause to the one and only Stephen Blank. Let's see it.
Last time somebody applauded like that, I didn't have any clothes
on. The bad part is that was during the dry run of the presentation. It's weird.
So, Derek, I got to tell you, I'm more nervous now than I've ever been because I've never given a presentation without 135 PowerPoints. So you guys truly have me naked, and I have no idea what I'm going to say. So
what do you think? This guy Kurt, who's come up here from LA, is living in his car. What does that embody for you? What does that mean to you to hear an experience like that?
The low housing costs.
Spoken like a true
Well,
his burn rate is pretty low. Very smart.
So
I'd like to see if he gets a parking lot full of entrepreneurs and they could start a company in someone's parking lot.
Occupy
Silicon Valley, no building at all. It's pretty cool.
That's a great idea. So we want to talk about a lot of things. We want to talk about your brand new book, which came out this last month. But we just want to get a little bit of background on you and who you are. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and your family, and some of those things that some of us probably don't know about you.
Yeah, well, I thought I've been in the witness protection program for a while, so I guess I'm going to have to talk about my background. A very non-traditional Silicon Valley, both background and history in the Valley, and maybe not for some of you, but my parents were immigrants to the United States. Came over in steerage, and people came over in ships, went through Ellis Island in New York, and then in the early part of the 20th century worked in sweatshops in New York City as teenagers. And then my parents met. Their dream was to open up a grocery store on the Lower East Side of New York. And not quite ever understanding this to maybe 50 years later, I realized my parents were entrepreneurs, and they did do a startup. And a startup is being defined as not working for anybody else other than yourself and being responsible for your own career. And they struggled as first-generation Americans did, and they had this dream for what their kid would do, and I did exactly the opposite.
And what did you work in the store? Did you? What was your
as
role?
a little kid, me and my sister had a sister who was about 12 years older. Your role is when you were tall enough not to fall into the pickle barrel.
Sure.
You shelved stuff and you helped around, and you tried not to eat all the candy. As you can tell, I failed.
Do you feel like, in terms of your work ethic, I was looking at your, some of your background and the things you've done, and it was like page after page after page. You seem to have a work ethic that is quite unique. Do you feel like that came from watching your parents kind of struggle through this experience in the store? Or do you feel like it was innate in you? Where did that come from?
No, I at least wouldn't say consciously, maybe unconsciously, but I was a real screw-up in school. By the time I was 6, my father left home, and my mother raised me as a single, semi-divorced parents in the 1960s. I don't think I did a day of homework because my mother was, let's just say I lived in an outpatient clinic, and that was my apartment. And so day to day, I never quite knew what was going on. So leaving home was probably the sanest thing that happened to me for the first 17 years of my life.
And talk about what, as you went to school, where did you go to school? What did you plan to study?
I went to school in New York City, and standard New York City public junior high and high school education. Like all of kids of my generation, first generation American Jewish immigrants, your son is going to be an accountant, a doctor, or a lawyer, depending on their, the tests. And of course, that was, what they packed me off and sent me to college to go do. Of course, that wasn't my plan.
How'd that work out?
I dropped out after my first semester. But I managed to try every possible interesting substance in school in the 70s. packed in a lot of activities, and another long story, but it was the middle of the Vietnam War, and through a couple of interesting trips, the first thing was I decided I hated college, and I couldn't focus on anything, and had no idea why I was there, and I had a girlfriend at the time who was actually working really hard to stay in school, and she said, and I happened to get a scholarship by accident, though after a while I realized not all of these are accidents, who said, why are you here? Some of us actually care to be in school. Why don't you leave and go figure out, what you want to go do? And I guess she didn't think I'd take her up on it, and I stuck out my thumb, and I hitchhiked from Michigan, where I went to school to Florida, and I ended up accidentally working at the Miami International Airport, loading racehorses onto cargo planes. And
Specialized? You were that vertical?
Yeah, that was try to find that ad in a newspaper. And knew nothing about airplanes, but became fascinated with, here I am in an airport, and I wasn't with the pilots. I didn't want to fly, but it was with all the electronics in the plane. I started taking home all the manuals and said, boy, I don't have to learn how to do this stuff. But so I said, gee, without any training, there's no way you're going to go ever do this. And fortunately or unfortunately, the government had a war going on and was looking for young and kind of semi-stupid teenagers, and I volunteered for the Air Force. And then ended up volunteering to go to Southeast Asia. I spent 2 years during the Vietnam War learning how to repair electronics, and got into a field called electronic warfare, which also happened to be an interesting accident as well.
And you were in Vietnam, or where were you stationed?
I was in Thailand for 2 years, 3-year basis, which Thailand had some fringe benefits at the time as well for teenagers. Wouldn't know. I would still tell my children I was just there.
It's a sushi.
It's just sushi, and I was just reading a lot. Trust me, I visited all the corners of the country. I learned a skill in the military, which was actually quite useful in Silicon Valley. You and I were chatting about this a bit. One is I realized I operated extremely well under chaos. And if you want chaos, first of all, you want the world's largest bureaucracy to deal with the military, and then in chaotic situations in wartime with hundreds of fighter planes on a base and blah blah blah, and stuff needed to be fixed, I was actually pretty calm, cool, and collected when stuff was breaking around me. And there were planes not coming back someday. And I remember coming to the Valley a couple of years later, somebody complaining, oh, this is so hard, so hard. Well, you could get fired here. I went, well, I was in a place where it was so hard you could get killed. So it was all kind of relative about what hard actually was about.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, you hear that a lot, like, man, how hard it is. And you actually talk about this in the book, how every founder thinks their experience is just so unique, right? And it's just like, I'm the only one that's ever been through this. And why is that not true? Why is that not the case?
Well, it's kind of about how human beings are wired. I mean, we do this in our own social lives as well. When you're having some emotional crisis or girlfriend or boyfriend crisis or a meltdown crisis in a relationship, you go, it's all about me. And that's just how our brains are wired. And, why psychologists are great is because, they've read the book and they realize there's only about 53 patterns. There are not an infinite number of patterns. One of the interesting things about entrepreneurship, and I guess the reason why I'm sitting here, is that I realized that the entrepreneur's journey is not a singular journey, that there are a set of patterns that we all kind of follow, even though our technology might be unique, or our apps are unique, or our business is unique. How we actually build companies and the journey we go through is actually a common pattern. And the riff, I kind of take that off of, there was a book written in the middle of the 20th century by a guy named Joseph Campbell, and it was called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Any of you ever have to read it in college? Campbell was a sociologist, anthropologist, had a really interesting observation. I'll just make it very short. If you read mythology through any culture, Chinese, Greek, Roman, Western, Irish, Norse myths, that the amazing thing is if you deconstruct all those myths, the storyline is the same. Identical storyline. There's a hero who has a calling, who kind of recruits a team, they go on a quest, they have to, pass a series of tests, there's either a physical or a virtual death and rebirth, and then there's insight at the end. And if you think of the story, even in the Judeo-Christian culture, it's the story of Moses, and it's the story of Star Wars. It's the same damn story.
Gosh, I love Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, you know.
It's tangent, but I'm just saying.
Well, but there's a Hollywood screenwriter's trick. They all read Joseph Campbell, right? Anybody? The guy, the videographer, have you read Joseph Campbell? There we go. Every videographer in the room has read Joseph Campbell, because that's how Hollywood screenwriters write scripts. You kind of go, okay, hero, calling, rebirth, etc. My point is that as I was thinking about not just my journey, but the journey of others, that holy cow, there seems to be a parallel for entrepreneurs.
Tell us about, so you were in Asia for 4 years, and we greatly appreciate your service there.
By the way, that was not what they said during the Vietnam War. I got spit on at San Francisco Airport in a uniform, so you should know that.
Let's get Steve.
No, come on, stop. You should just know that people saying we're grateful for your service nowadays is an enormously grateful thing, and it just shows how far this country has gone in being able to separate out the difference for the people who serve from the policies of the country. And back in the 70s, we weren't smart enough to kind of understand that. So that, the people who serve today, again, have the same issues, but are now respected by their country for their service.
Anyone here served in the military? John was in Afghanistan for a few years. A couple guys. Yeah. Tell us, when you came back, you spent 4 years over there. When you came back, what did you do next?
Well, I tried school again. This time I said, well, maybe not a pre-med. I know something about electronics. I'll be an engineer. And so I went back to the University of Michigan. And as I like to say, when I go back there and speak now, I do remind people at University of Michigan that U of M was the best school I was ever thrown out of. So I just kind of decided that attention deficit disorder and universities just didn't have a great career match. So I joined, actually, a startup I don't even count as, I guess it would be my 9th startup, one in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This really is an interesting Ann Arbor story. It's a state of entrepreneurship circa 1976. I joined the startup in Ann Arbor. I was their field service department. It must have been 15 people. I didn't even understand what a startup was. And then one day, I'm flying around the Midwest when the U.S. still manufactured stuff. So I went through every automobile plant in the U.S. I went through every steel plant in the U.S. I went and watched, them pour steel and make cars and make appliances in Dayton. It was just amazing to go through this. And then one day, the company said, you need to go to a Ford manufacturing plant in a town called Milpitas. It's now where the Great Mall is, by the way. It used to be a Ford plant. And we got to send you to a city called San Jose. No one ever heard of San Jose. And the first plane tickets they get, he said, San Jose, Puerto Rico. And I go, I think something tells me this is the wrong one. So I fly out here with an engineer. This is 1976. And we get into the rent-a-car at the airport. Now, you got to understand, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, if you were lucky in 1976, there was one line in a newspaper with dead trees. I don't know if any of you remember those dead trees printed ink. For engineers, one line. We're not talking about one page. We're talking about one line. And no one had ever heard of this place out here at all. It wasn't even called Silicon Valley. And so we get in the car. We turn on the rent-a-car radio. And all of a sudden, we hear an ad. And the ad goes, scientists, engineers, Intel is hiring. And we kind of go, there's someone screwing with our head. Because an ad on the truck or something. It was like, it was like a radio ad for engineers. And we went, we just kind of look at each other. We pull into the motel. The company was so cheap we had to share a room. My friend grabs the shower first. I turn on the TV. And literally watching, I don't know, Sunday. And by the way, I just buy the San Jose Mercury from this. And it's really thick. It's the thickest newspaper I've ever seen. I put the paper down, turn on the TV. In the middle of the shower, there's another ad. Tandem is hiring engineers, technicians, whatever. And I'm looking at the TV going, what, where am I? And I go, it's not quick, come out, take a look at this. And, he runs out naked with a towel, and, by the time the ad is on, and he goes back in, and so I start looking at the newspaper. And back then, the San Jose Mercury News Sunday had 45 pages of ads for engineers. Wow. Thank you, Craigslist. 45 pages. And literally, I'm looking at this going, where are we? What is this place? And of course, Hussam, this is the distinction between a crazed entrepreneur and me, is, looks at this stuff, nods, and, says, okay, time to go to work. I run out and buy a suit, an interview, and, never go back to Ann Arbor other than to pack up my luggage because I got my first job going, I don't know where I am, but this is a lot cooler than where I was. So that's how I came to Silicon Valley. I might run out of things to say, so keep asking.
That's great. It's not like so you took that first job. When did you found your first company? And you talked about the one in Michigan, but your first company out here, and tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm really impressed. I have students in Stanford and Berkeley, and some of them I saw in this building. I did a much different path than the brave students who actually, or some of you who found a company in your 20s or 30s or whatever. I did an apprenticeship. I mean, without understanding it was an apprenticeship. I stumbled into a startup in Ann Arbor, kind of understood it wasn't like IBM, but it was kind of cool, And then, again, stumbled into another one in Silicon Valley. I didn't know what I was interviewing for. Just, oh, you were in the military, you did this? Oh, great. Well, you ought to talk to these guys. Not knowing, I accidentally interviewed and got a job for the most secret company in Silicon Valley in the middle of the Cold War. It was the prime contractor for the CIA, NSA, and National Reconnaissance Office all at once. And by accident, I end up as the training instructor for the CIA, for the NSA, in the photo you saw with me with the biggest afro you had ever seen. You got to see this photo. And so my first job in Silicon Valley was for a guy named Bill Perry. I don't know if anybody knows who Bill Perry is. He became Secretary of Defense about 4 or 5 years later. If you want
really
to
struck a chord with our live blogger over there.
And if you want to read,
I have an old boss that's at the Pentagon right now.
And if you want to read any of the stories, I have a blog called steveblank.com. There's a category called The Secret History of Silicon Valley, and you could read some of my adventures, kind of like in Secret Land as my first startup. But the really interesting thing, and it was a startup, and Bill Perry was one of the smartest guys in the Cold War. For the Valley had. Anybody know who the largest employer in Silicon Valley was for the first 20 years in the history of the Valley? Any idea? Lockheed. Lockheed. Anybody know what Lockheed made in the 50s and 60s? Submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Silicon Valley in the 50s and 60s was one of the largest weapon manufacturing centers in the United States. We had an assembly line making Polaris, Poseidon, and Trident submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Not only Lockheed, but a company called Westinghouse wasn't making refrigerators. They were making the launch tubes. And, by the way, anybody ever been to Bonnie Doon in the Santa Cruz Mountains? Yeah? That's where they tested the missiles. Now, that would be good enough. By the way, Lockheed went from 0 employees in 1956 to 25,000 in 1960. Wow. 0 to 25,000. You might put Google, Facebook, and all those to shame. But even better, anybody know where East Palo Alto is? Yeah. In East Palo Alto, Lockheed had a different facility. It's where they were secretly making spy satellites on Willow Road. Lockheed made all the Corona, Gambit, and Hexagon imaging satellites, and then some of their interesting follow-ons on the old Hiller aircraft manufacturing plant on Willow Road. And so Silicon Valley in the 50s and 60s, while the semiconductor business was emerging, was also the center of Cold War weapons manufacturers. The other piece, and then I'll just stop, is in the 50s and 60s, Stanford, in the middle of the engineering school, had a 400-person secret weapons lab. 3/4 of all the graduate theses were classified by 1965, just to give you a scale of the business you were in. And at the same time, we were doing all this black stuff, meaning secret stuff. We were beginning to create a commercial industry as well. 1956 is also the year that William Shockley sets up the first semiconductor plant in Mountain View. And then after that, 18 months later, Fairchild Semiconductor starts, and 65 semiconductor companies spin out of Fairchild in the next 20 years. And that's how we became Silicon Valley. But it was all an accident. There really was no... And if you want to see this, there's a video called The Secret History of Silicon Valley on YouTube. Kind of interesting to understand the place that you all kind of thought, gee, we just do web browsers here. I don't know. We do iOS apps, you know. Right? And so that was a long soliloquy that my first company was in the deep black world. And by the way, the interesting thing is the government, when they still want to solve a technical problem, actually does it quite well because they could throw infinite cash on a technical solution. And so while I was doing that, I had housemates. I rented a house in Palo Alto off of University Avenue, doing the whole, have a house with a bunch of housemates who were working with these stupid little things called microprocessors. I mean, they were just silly. I mean, there was the Intel 4004. I had to laugh. We had roomfuls of stuff you wouldn't imagine. These guys were, but they were doing like stuff they wanted to do. And they were masters of their own fate while I was working on projects that had spacecraft and semiconductor fabs and whatever. And these guys were, look, I could connect the audio speaker to this, isn't this cool? And I'm going, we got things in space that you would rather, oh, look, it can make a noise. But I actually thought their stuff was a lot cooler. And so finally, I was kind of torn between actually making my career in the black world or trying to get into some of this innovative stuff where you're masters of your own fate. And I finally made the choice. I joined a startup semiconductor company called Zilog, which made the Z80 and then the Z8000 microprocessors. And I was first the head of training and education. I taught microprocessor design. You never want to be in a system I was teaching you how to design, but that was what I did. And then eventually I became a product marketeer. I knew so much about the products that somebody said, perhaps you ought to help us write data sheets than just teach the customers. And that was my first move into marketing, was for a semiconductor startup.
How long did it take for that industry, the whole, with the weapons and with Lockheed? How long did it take for that to go away? Because did it phase out slowly? Was it here? Did it explode one day and it's gone the next day? Or
what makes you think it's gone? So anybody know about Palantir, who's the most visible block company here? Yeah. Palantir is just a great example of, we no longer make massive weapon systems because we can't afford them anymore, but we do a lot of cyber stuff and we do a lot of bits. The CIA and NSA have their own venture capital firm called In-Q-Tel. Any of you doing something of interest to the government should probably get some funding from them. And so I call this hidden in plain sight. You might not know what these companies do, and if you don't need to know, then you don't know. But the Valley has always been great at that. And so yeah, they're still here. They just aren't making ICBMs, and the large projects are probably in a place where you won't see them.
I always thought Palantir was doing Facebook apps. Is that all right? I went in there one time.
They have your name. That's why I tape over my camera on my iMac.
What?
Think about it.
Right here.
Think about it.
No one would ever want to. I want to talk about your book, and I want to talk about.
Yeah, let's talk about something.
No, I want to talk about that. But I wanted to just ask you. You've seen so many of these cycles in the Valley, and we're now on another pretty solid cycle. What are you seeing with what it was when you got here, all the way through the .com to what it is today? What is your perception of the market right now, and what is your take on it?
Yeah, so I'll start with somebody asked me that is, what the hell do I know? I've just been around a long time. But there are some really interesting things for entrepreneurs you should appreciate because it's happened so slowly you don't realize it. When I came out here, this was an information sparse area for an entrepreneur. If you had a coffee with someone who actually knew something once a week or once a month, that was a lot of data, right? And so you kind of sucked up every piece of data you could find on how to build and start companies because it was rare. I mean, there was no web, there was no net, no anything. Nowadays, entrepreneurs have I think, a much worse problem, if you could believe it. It's too much information because if you want an opinion about any possible direction you could take, it's on the web, or somebody's written a book from it, or you read your favorite blog. And all that information is, unless you have a profound belief or some guidance for yourself, that could jerk you around in 15 different directions and just melt you down. And so one of the things I teach my students is, eventually you need to develop your own moral compass. And not just moral compass, your own entrepreneurship compass. It's great to buy my book or Eric Ries's or Osterwalder's, or there's now at least a body of knowledge that you can start with. But I got to tell you, that's not where you want to end up. Nothing makes me happier than someone saying, I read your book, but let me tell you how we're really going to do it. Great, because now at least you have your own compass. I'm happy that you start with mine. So that's kind of the one major difference. The other is Silicon Valley has weathered almost every major crisis. Everybody said, well, we're out of innovation, we're going to shut down. You know, there was the defense wave, and then there was semiconductor wave, and then there was the, you know, PC wave, and then the Web 1.0 wave, and every time people go, well, you know, there's no more need for X. People forget is what we really do from San Francisco to San Jose now is we no longer make products here. What we do, that's not what we really do now. We're the center of innovation and entrepreneurship for not only the United States, but for the world. And that's a big idea. What we do here is we encourage risk and we accept failure. And I have to tell you, when I have foreign visitors come into Stanford and go, you know, how would you explain Silicon Valley? I get it down to a sentence. I go, you know what we call a failed entrepreneur in Silicon Valley? I said, there's a special word for it. And they all kind of guess. And blah, blah, blah. I said, well, the special word for a failed entrepreneur here, it's experienced. And they look at you and it's like they can't compute. I go, no, no, no. A failed entrepreneur doesn't have to change their name. They haven't shamed their family or their community or anywhere else. In fact, yeah, you know, I used to like first step one, blame it on someone else, you know. But if you actually have what I call an honest failure, you go, let me tell you the 50 ways I screwed this up. This is my fault. Blah blah blah. The next time you have coffee with a friend in the Valley, they don't ask you is, you know, like, did you have to pay the money back? They ask you, so what's your next startup? Nowhere else in the world is that said. We take for granted that we're living in an innovation environment and an entrepreneurship culture where failure and the cycles of failure and success are celebrated. And the other part about our culture is no one looks at somebody who just made 20 million bucks and said, you know, goddamn capitalists, you know, we hate them. Someone goes, well, yeah, I'm smarter than them, it's just my time hasn't come, right? And in fact, in a room like this, I kind of remind people that, you know, like in this room, there's at least a couple of you who are going to be worth 100 million bucks in the next couple of years. Yeah, all right. And I also remind you, you should look around. For me. You should look around, is that most of you would have been better off working at Walmart. And that's not the funny part. Because the funny part is the true entrepreneurs in the room were feeling sorry for the poor son of a bitches in the rest of the room. So if you were the ones who were thinking, why, that's going to be me, then, you know, you got the right DNA. So this culture is kind of unique. And that said, what really has happened in the last maybe 5 or 10 years is the democratization of entrepreneurship. It used to be that a startup required millions of dollars. And the only place to get it was Sand Hill Road, or when I started in Boston, if you were, which was, believe it or not, competing with Silicon Valley for who was the entrepreneurship center. We used waterfall engineering, so the time to market was measured in years. You know, you needed to buy expensive computers and expensive software. Computing wasn't a utility. Thank you, Amazon. You know, we take for granted all this stuff. But now, in fact, especially for web and mobile and cloud apps, you can get a minimum viable product out in weeks, if not months. You know, it takes hundreds of thousands of dollars to get first customers, not millions. And, you know,
or less, right? Or
right?
free.
Or free. Or living in your car. Now, I wanted to know if he was really creative, he would be siphoning gas. So that, you know, okay, you know, that's the car thing, but tell me, like, you haven't bought gas in another, you know, but if you really think about it now, that's really allowed entrepreneurship to sprout in areas that we never thought possible. I mean, a one Dave McClure, a 500 hats could start an entrepreneurial cluster by just funding, you know, 200 startups, where, you know, that amount of cash might have just, you know, funded lunch money for, you know, a traditional hardware company. So while the Valley is getting, you know, more and more denser and is kind of the place to be, there are entrepreneurship clusters occurring in different places in the country and different places in the world. I've been to Chile, I've been to Finland, I've been to Moscow, and in Europe, and seen these, and it's really kind of amazing. And the web has, and these kinds of conversations are now available instantly anywhere. So it's not like we're hoarding, you know, extreme knowledge. And so, I forgot your question, but I think I answered.
That's great. That's great.
Getting too old.
This kind of segues great into the book, which is what I want to talk about.
Hey, isn't that Bill Gates over there?
So when my first experience, and I'll just share a very quick story. I launched a product in 2010, and it was an iPhone app. It was a game, and my background is marketing. I was at EA for a number of years, and we launched this game. And I tell you what, the marketing was the greatest work of my career. It was incredible. I mean, Gizmodo, was saying it was the best app ads they'd ever seen, and people would tweet, man, this is amazing marketing. Just send these guys money. And then the same guys 2 days later, when they played our game, said, my gosh, I know where they put all their money. They put it into this awesome marketing stuff. And yeah, it was brutal. It was totally brutal. You can sigh
I
or
did
whatever.
one of those. I raised $35 million for one of those. Got on the cover of Wired for Rocket Science Games. And that was the high point of the company. Because at least your games were playable. Mine would crash your computer. But I still have the cover. And the kids go, who's that guy that looks like you, Dad? I said, oh, that's your long-lost brother.
Well, a few months or a month after, I was reading your book, 4 Steps to Epiphany, and I literally smacked my forehead and just said, what am I doing? And we're going to get into why. Who has read that book? Okay, so if I had read that book, I wouldn't have made those mistakes. But talk to us a little bit about. So that book is a staple in entrepreneurs. Whatever, satchels or whatever. But why put this effort forward to get another book out to kind of refine these ideas? What motivated you to do that?
Yeah, and so if you don't mind, I'll try to be brief, but
sure.
I doubt it.
I'm going to do something while you're doing it. Just keep going.
You could go out, get a car, start a company. I retired after the 8th startup, and the reason I did is I had kids who were 7 and 8 years old, and I decided the 8th startup happened to be at the last .com bubble. And growing up how I did, I actually knew the meaning of enough money, enough whatever. And what you don't get back is enough time. And having a family and doing 8 startups, I saw a lot of people do some great startups, people who were my heroes, whose kids hated them when they finally grew up and when they had some wisdom to go back and try to find their family was gone. And I kind of said if I ever had the opportunity, I wasn't going to make that mistake. By the way, there's a blog post I've written called Epitaph for an Entrepreneur. Some of you've read it. For those of you who have families or wish you had one, you should read it. It's not how to do it right. It's just what my wife and I did. So it's not right. It's just what we did in raising kids and doing 8 startups. And the good news is our kids are college age and still love to spend Christmas holidays with us and come home in breaks and whatever, which makes us think we did something right. So the only point is I decided I was done. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. But just a couple of things came to mind. One is I was going to write my memoirs. Thinking, well, gee, this should be interesting. And 80 pages into it, I realized a couple of things. One is I'd have to pay my kids to read it, let alone anybody else. No, actually, it's turned into my blog, so I got some repurposed. But truly, one day I was sitting and the kids were out skiing with my wife, truly just looking at it, and I had an epiphany, just a flash, which is where the name of the book came from, also came from my last company, that in those memoirs was a pattern I had never recognized before. And by this time, I was sitting on boards of companies, public companies, private companies, advisory boards, etc. Hadn't seen as much as a VC, but had seen a lot. And then realized I was looking at a pattern I had never seen anybody else describe. Is that, here was a failure pattern that we were doing time and time again that the VCs weren't telling us about. And I went, could it be? Could it, it was like we had venture capital banking with them for 40 years. What the hell, And so I started talking to my VC friends, and they went, oh yeah, we kind of know this. Oh yeah, you kind of know this. How come you don't tell the rest of us? Well, it's not our job. Well, wait a minute, what's your job? Steve, we're just doing fine. We got a great IRR. The system works, Well,
mess it up for us.
But yeah, there's a bunch of wreckage. Don't you think you could improve the IRR if we kind of reduced infant mortality? Yeah, maybe, but that's not what we do. And if you really think about it, VCs are just an extended form of a financial asset class. That takes much different risks. But if they were creative and innovative, they'd have your jobs. No, it's no joke. And it doesn't mean they're stupid or whatever. But they're not what they do. They don't have huge visions. They're sometimes smart enough with pattern recognition skills to recognize great teams and great market opportunities, but expecting this to come from VCs, I guess in hindsight, now that I realize this, would have been a surprise. But the other thing that I noticed was no one had written this down. And so the other part of my career was I had decided after I had gotten lucky at Epiphany, which was my last company, that I was going to give back to the community that was so great to me for 20 years. I mean, this was just a classic American success story. And so we set up a foundation, and I, did a bunch of stuff in conservation and the environment. And then I decided I'd like to teach, because it was actually the first job I had in Silicon Valley, and then I moved into marketing for the next 20 years. But I actually enjoyed it, and I thought it would be great to somehow give back to students what I had learned. But, most of the entrepreneurs who taught at the time basically were coming in and telling war stories. Let me tell you how it was when I was, blah, 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 which is kind of interesting, but after a while, it's kind of like eating candy. There's, still hungry later. And I decided that maybe it was interesting to take this observation about this pattern and turn it into a class. And so I wrote a class for UC Berkeley in the business school called Customer Development. And I was practicing some of these ideas, and at the same time, an old VP of engineering of mine from rocket science days, a guy named Harvey, was starting it's like 5th company with a real young, hot co-founder. And Will wanted to raise money from me yet again. And this time I said, Will, why don't you and your co-founder sit through my class and see if you can learn something here. Steve, I said, Will, come on. But by the first class, his co-founder was really getting into this and saying, hey, yeah, and do you know about agile engineering? And I'm going, what's that? And we had a great time. And so the co-founder, and I kind of knew him because I was on their board of their last company, which had cratered, called There.com, and the co-founder's name was Eric Ries. So Eric sat through my customer development class, and it was Eric who said, Steve, you've been Xeroxing your class notes. Why don't you just stick them together in a book? You're on the board of Cafe Press, self-publish this damn thing and stick it on Amazon. I said, Eric, what a great idea. And so the 4 steps of the Epiphany, came from Eric Ries sitting in my class, and the Lean Startup movement came from me sitting on Eric's board at IMVU. And Eric was the first guy to recognize that it was not only customer development, that it was the combination of customer development and the whole agile engineering methodology that had emerged since I had been an entrepreneur that really made a powerful combination. And that's where the whole Lean Startup movement started as well. I forgot what the question was again, but I hope I answered something.
No, it's great. Let me just read one quote. Maybe you can just explain the customer development methodology. Customer development recognizes the startup's missions as a relentless search to refine its vision and idea, and to make changes in every aspect of the business invalidated during the search process. Why is a startup's job to relentlessly search for that business model, that repeatable business model?
Because the short answer is because you're probably wrong. And one of the great things about the yin and yang of an entrepreneur is you wouldn't get up in the morning unless you were passionate about your vision, right? It's, you don't get up in the morning and go, well, I'm probably sort of kind of right. I mean, you don't do that. You've got to believe, because why else would you work the number of hours or, just the commitment or try to convince people to join you on this quest? But the reality is, most of the time, your hypotheses about product market fit, about the value proposition and customer segment, is just fundamentally wrong. It's just wrong. You might believe it. In fact, you've got to believe it. But the mistake is executing like it's true. It's not the mistake is not believing it. The mistake is just assuming that if I believe it, it must absolutely, the world is just waiting for me to kind of finish coding or, building the hardware, and then the only problem I'm going to have is where does the bags of money go? I mean, and I don't know, only this half of the room thought that was interesting. So let me try to get over here. Where the bags of money go? Get it over here. I just want to make sure. Maybe feel a little something left hand and right hand. I just wanted to explain that it's part of the yin and yang of entrepreneurial DNA. You kind of got to believe, but you make some assumptions. That is, and the key assumptions are, I understand the customer problem. Big idea. If I understand it, therefore it must be right. And implicitly, when you say I understand the customer problem, or implicitly, you're saying, therefore I know what features they need. And if you say, I know what features they need, then all I need to do is go implement. And so I don't need to get out of the building. You know, that's kind of the nature of entrepreneurship. And what I try to point out in the 4 Steps to the Epiphany and the new book, The Startup Owner's Manual, is almost 99% of the time, those initial assumptions about the customer problem and what features they need, among 50 other things, is just simply wrong. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're wrong forever. But it means that if you spend all your energy trying to implement that first vision, it's a ton of waste. Wasted time, wasted money, wasted energy, wasted company. And what we've now figured out is if you follow a customer development process, I can't guarantee you'll be Facebook or Google or Apple. But I will guarantee you that you'll live a lot longer. And that over a
Your startup career.
well, you know, and maybe somebody won't kill you. I mean,
Please share.
right. What we've discovered is, for those of you in computer science, is entrepreneurship without any guidance is an NP-complete problem. And if you think of having a methodology, we collapse it into an NP problem, meaning it's still very hard, but it's now computationally solvable. And I don't mean solvable for you're going to be Facebook or Twitter or some black swan, but it means the odds of you going out of business out of stupidity for the first 2 years, we can now eliminate. And so if you really want to think, you know, of what the Startup Owner Manual title really should have been, because I almost thought of calling this, is it's the book on how to fail less. Thank you. It was funny up here.
He's a black card member.
Black
So
card
he's very smart.
He's an experienced guy. So
for this-
fail less, that means you'll. All right. So I hope that answers.
Yeah. So the book is built more like it's not something you pick up on your trip to Maui to read at the pool, right? It's more of
That's where I wrote it, but
it's more of an encyclopedia. It's
a reference manual.
It's a reference manual.
Right.
Yeah. And I wanted to take one piece of it and just get some experiences from a couple of people in the room, and then maybe we could analyze it. Because in my opinion, if I had attended this in early 2010, before the iPad launched, and we launched our game, I would not have failed quite so hard.
I don't believe it. Was it your first startup?
Yeah, pretty much.
So here's the interesting thing. I want to test it on you. First-time entrepreneurs, when you hear advice like in the Startup Owner's Manual or 4 Steps to the Epiphany, you kind of file it away along with other interesting tidbits like the Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion table. It's kind of nice to have and whatever. But I got to tell you, you're talking like an entrepreneur who screwed it up and now actually has gone back and learned some lessons. I will contend that if I actually gave you this book the day you started your company, when you were feeling like the hot EA product manager, what are the odds you actually would have paid attention?
Well, I had a full head of hair at that time, Steve, so I was probably.
So the answer is you probably would have ignored it. Right?
Confidence was at an all-time high.
No, but we won't go into that algorithm. But do you see what I mean? And it's not a diss on anybody. It's just how we're wired. It's not till you actually have had, unless you're incredibly astute, and this room might be full of incredibly astute people. It took me 8 startups to kind of figure it out. Some people are a lot smarter. It's just that until you've had that, entrepreneurship is experiential. It's like getting the sex manual. That's great. Okay, I'm supposed to do what? And then after the first time you had sex, you went, oh yeah, let's do that again. This is kind of the anti-sex. Don't do that. That hurts. The analogy
No one in this room got that joke. Knowing my audience.
I'll use a better example. I still remember the moment I taught my younger daughter the word hot. My younger daughter was wired kind of like me, bouncing off of balls and whatever. And I remember, Sarah, fire's hot. Hot. Sarah, hot. And then I went, okay, and I just made sure there was nothing flammable around her, and she put her finger in her. Sarah's never forgotten the word hot, and we still remember that exact moment. Entrepreneurship is like that. Until you've kind of touched the third rail of failure, some of these lessons are just theory. And so, I'm glad the book is popular, and I'm glad whatever, and for a lot of people, it will sit on a shelf forever. I got to tell you the funniest thing about the book is, 4 Steps to the Epiphany has never been on Kindle or iBook or whatever. And Startup Owner's Manual, I got hate mail going, it's not on the Kindle, and I'm not going to buy it forever. And I'm kind of going, help me understand. this is a book that could change your life. And I appreciate, and by the way, it will be in an electronic version, sometime in 2012, let me just say that. But just to kind of go, I'm going to hold my breath and turn blue until you, wait a minute, about 3,000 years ago, there were some guys who came down with a mountain and they were carrying stone tablets, and people made religions and they were carrying the tablets around. I mean, these aren't the tablets, but you don't have advice per pound, guys. It's not. It's not. In fact, if you want lightweight advice, I'll be happy to give you other books on the Kindle. But when there is advice, you need to chase it. I remember flying to New York for 15-minute meetings. I did that multiple times in my life. If you're a killer entrepreneur, I don't care where the great advice is, and if it's chiseled in stone or bark or somewhere else, you will go after that, a great advisor or great someone else. And so just as a riff, I have to tell you, I've saved all the emails of must have been 5 or 10 just nasty people going, well, it's not, never going to buy it. Going, if it were me, I'd be going out, figuring out where our ranch is, and standing outside the gate going can I get a preview copy?
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
That was great. So you answered it. It was awesome. So we're gonna Dan, take away this. We're gonna go through just a few examples.
Okay.
How are we on time? Where are we at? 8? You guys okay for another 15, 20 minutes? Okay. So we're gonna talk about. We're gonna just use a couple examples of the 9 deadly sins of the new product introduction model. Thanks, Brian. So let's go to the first one. So this is from someone in the room. You guys can try and guess who it is before I show you the face. I understand who the customer will be, what they need, and how to sell to them. I'm extremely open to any feedback, although nothing you could possibly say will change my mind. But I love your feedback. So who was that? Can we see who that was? Who was it? We can hear it again. That was Brian. Where's Brian? Who just helped us with the wire. So tell us about. You did say that, right, Brian? Yeah. So an entrepreneur who's too stubborn. What are the problems with an entrepreneur who's too stubborn to listen to advice?
It's. Is somebody explaining that to you, Brian? Is that
It's a very profound quote of mine, but I don't remember saying it.
You did. Oh, what a punch this right here. Ruining my demo, Brian.
So, if you remember what I said earlier, is that one of the great things about entrepreneurs is your drive and your vision and what gets you up in the morning. And one of the things, in fact, one of the wonderful things about entrepreneurship is you've got to believe, right? If you don't believe, and you kind of quiver, everybody else behind you is going to crack, right? You are the titular leader because you see this vision. I mean, if you think about it, how many of you are founders? Okay? Founders, and how many of you are engineers? Right? I'm going to tell you the bad news. You're no longer engineers. When you're a founder, you're an artist. Okay? You see things others don't. Michelangelo, when he was working on the Pieta, somebody came in and saw a 12-foot block of marble. And he said, what the heck is this? He said, it's the most beautiful sculpture in the world. I mean, it's a 12-foot block of marble. He said, you just can't see it. 2 years later, they come back, and their breath was taken away. It was the Pieta. If any of you have seen pictures, it is right up there. And they said, how did you do that? And he said, I just removed the stone around the sculpture. And that's what a founder does. Beethoven was deaf when he did his last symphonies. But he heard something that no one else could hear. And like great founders, he was able to recruit early employees, the First Symphony, to play something that no one else had ever heard. And so founder of Van Gogh, sitting in a field at night, it's a blank canvas. Next morning, there's a picture of Starry Night. There was his ear, but there was still Starry Night. I was bored, I couldn't hear. But what you guys are doing are actually closer to what artists do, the founders. Because you see something, and then you recruit an early group to say, no, look over there. Look, can you see it? Can you see over there? Come on with me, we're heading over there. So if you don't have that vision and passion, you can't recruit the team, and you can't even believe your own vision. The problem is the conundrum about entrepreneurship is that the vision is most often a hallucination. And so you need some process in the back of your head to test that
that process without losing faith. And the customer development process is just a great way to explain to your entire team, listen, this is where we're heading. This is it. This is the business model. But you know what? We're not going to be so stupid to ignore facts as we get out of the building. And that's the problem of we want to go in, but I'm going to ignore all input is what tends to put you out of business.
How do you balance that when a founder's got this incredible vision and they say, I know this is the direction we need to go, and they get there and they're just flat out wrong, which you've said most people are. How does a founder then come to grips with that and say, okay, well, my vision was all screwed up, but now my vision is this, and we're going to head this way? So
the mistake we used to make in doing this is we'd say, kind of like, oh, we'll hire some early salespeople and we'll go out and try to pre-sell the product. And of course, I don't know if you know how that works. Let's say I just hired this guy over here as my salesperson. Go out and ask him about our new product. Ask him what he thinks. It sucks. It sucks. Tell him it sucks.
It sucks.
Okay, all right. And you ask a couple more people.
What do you want?
No, ask a couple more people. You're the sales guy. All right, ask him over here. Yeah. It sucks. Yeah, great. All right. Now come back and tell the CEO.
They don't want it.
Well, you don't want to say that.
All right. And what do you think the first time you tell me that I'm going to say? Any idea? You're not explaining it correctly. Get the hell back out there. Now go back out again. Go ask him. So, all right. Now come back out and tell me a second time. You're fired. No joke. Anybody recognize this from Silicon Valley for founders? It can't be wrong. Why did I fire him? It's my idea. He's an idiot. Right? Now wait a minute. Now we're going to do customer development. I'm on your board, or you believe the book. You're not allowed to hire anybody. You're the founder. Get the hell out and talk to customers. Now, the first time I talk to you, what do you tell me? It sucks. And I'm going, they just don't get it. Right? Anybody ever say, no one ever said that in this room, right? They just don't get it. Talk to somebody else. Nah, couldn't be. Now, about the third or fourth time, cognitive dissonance is setting in because I'm the founder. It's my idea, and smoke is coming out of my ears, and there's no place to hide. Right there, you just got why customer development is valuable. There is no place. We're just talking about human nature here. I could ignore it by blaming other people. Now I got to deal with my vision, meeting the facts head on. Now, if I actually understood this process and had in my mind the entire business model canvas, I could actually start asking intelligent questions. Well, like, what would you buy? Or, gee, I just heard you say you would buy it if it was painted pink. What if I painted it kind of pink? Or, and now I could actually engage in understanding the problems and successes of the product. The best example of this in my own career happened just after I joined this company called Conversion Technologies in the very early 1980s. There was a founder who had been in Intel and an old company called Digital Equipment, and they were going to build what was called, back then, a radical new product called a single board computer. They were going to do an entire computer on a board because it had a microprocessor on it. Just a breakthrough. Because mini computers were a room full of stuff. And so he thought he was going to sell thousands of these single boards to other computer companies who would somehow embed them in their own machines. And so we went to the first company called, NCR, and they saw the board and said, oh, this is great, Alan. And Alan said, how many will you take? And they said, 4. He said, 4? You mean 4,000? No, 4. Well, why wouldn't you take 4,000? Well, it needs an operating system, it needs languages, it needs a box, you don't have any of that stuff. Alan goes, oh, they don't get it. Calls another company called Prime Computer at the time. Now, how many will you take? 9. 9,000? No, 9. Same story. No operating system, no applications. Finally, this repeats, blah, blah, blah. He goes to a company called Burroughs. And Burroughs' guy said, 6. And Alan actually knew what the answer was going to be. He said, oh, you just want 6 for the prototypes? Yeah. And he said, I guess you want an operating system. Yeah, if we had an operating system and apps. He said, well, how many would you take then? Oh, we could sell 10 or 15,000. He said, well, what would the operating system look like? And they kind of went, blah, blah, blah. He said, we have that. Well, does it have any application? Sure. Which ones do you need? Well, we need a word processor printer. We got that too. And a box. Oh, what kind? Steel? No, plastic. We have a plastic version, And like Alan went back to his co-founder who said, now remember, this is the early actually it was the late 70s, who said, You know, Alan, you just can't write an operating system and applications at the time. And Alan said, why? Because they were hardware people. Well, where do you get them? And his co-founder said the only place in Silicon Valley you could get them is Xerox PARC. You'd have to hire half a Xerox PARC. Next week, Alan Michaels hired half a Xerox PARC. Convergent went from $0 to $400 million in 3 years, selling complete computer systems. This is just before the PC era, and that's where I had my first VP of marketing job, watching this insane guy actually do customer development without actually understanding what the word was. He was ahead of the customers, he was listening, he was able to make claims and then make good on them by hearing what the customer needs and desires were. And that's where I learned some of this.
Let's go to, skip through the next one. Dan, go to one more. Keep going. One more. There you go, right there. Okay, so this is a problem a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is focus on a launch date. Let's read an example here. I set a date to launch our product, and I refuse to let it move. There's no way. Our B2B enterprise software for stay-at-home moms has a marketing promotion with Red Bull in July. Marketing and I won't stand for a delay. Weekend work for the engineers till Christmas. So why doesn't a good entrepreneur stick to a hard and set fast launch date? Who was that, by the way? Who said that? Oh, it's Daniel. Dan right here. He's helping us. He's a good guy, though.
So this is part of the death spiral, right? You know, this is what happens when you don't understand that your goal is not the marketing date. I made this mistake since you did games. Rocket Science is a video game. We got to make the Christmas selling season, right? And that means you needed stuff
Oh,
like
yeah, that's the worst.
channel and whatever. What we never said is, perhaps the games ought to be good for the Christmas selling season. Right? But no, we're going to run out of money. You missed the selling season, right? It's the whole quarter makes the entire year. And instead of saying, excuse me, but you know, we're either going to go out of business because we'll run out of money making great games, or we're definitely going to go out of business, you know, running out of money making the world's shittiest games, which was the option we chose. 35 minutes. Listen, why the Valley is so great, why I love that Rocket Science story. It was the biggest failure of my career. It left a crater so deep it has its own iridium layer, and it probably can be seen from the moon. But why this the Valley is, I love telling this to people outside the Valley, is I called up my mother after I created this company, and in Russian she said, "Are they going to make you pay the money back?" I said, "Mom, no. The two VCs just handed me a check for my next company, $12 million." And then she said, "Only in America are the streets paved with gold." And the joke is, of course,
Became a song.
Right, I returned
After
$1
that
billion
conversation.
each to the two VCs who bet on my next company. Only in America. But back to here, you could artificially constrain for any of the wrong constraints you want. Right? What you really need to constrain for is, you know, how do we satisfy customers? Because first customer ship date is a death march. It's a death march to an artificial deadline. What you really need to understand is, have we found a repeatable and scalable business model? Period. End of discussion. Everything else is being driven by the wrong things, including sometimes bad VCs who are beating you with a stick and not understanding that you know, it's just not going to work that way. You can't beat success into a company. You need to find it. I don't know if that's
That's great. Yep, let's go to the next one. So this is another mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make, which is emphasis on execution instead of hypothesis. It's like I always tell my team, get it done and get it done freaking fast. You're not here to learn, you're here to work. After I say that, I always feel much better, and I usually treat myself to dinner at French Laundry.
Is this the Zynga corporate motto? Is this from Zynga? Yeah, I
Got some taste.
Mark Pincus said that. So,
Funny and true.
actually sad and true, but listen, you know, I am the guy who talks about learning and iteration and etc. For those anybody ever unfortunate enough to work for me when I was in a startup, execution and relentless execution, relentless, was part of the game. So while we could all talk about it's nice to learn and blah, 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 and great, aren't we having fun, and yes, I all want you to get smarter. But let me tell you, you were sleeping under your desk because I was sleeping under the desk. And I wasn't even in engineering, and I was there. You know, this is a full contact, full body sport. So while, you know, I take exception to, of course, execution instead of learning and discovery, don't think that execution doesn't matter. If you're not relentless, and if you're not making people exhausted, you're not doing a startup, you're doing a hobby. So I just want you to hear that, is that my other thing about the last 30 years of entrepreneurship that I lived is you really had to want to be an entrepreneur. Nowadays, it's kind of a popular thing to do, and I don't think there's too much filter on a good number of people shouldn't be in this, quote, job. And I'll give you an example. I always teach every year a joint MBA class with Berkeley and Columbia executives. And almost every year I could set my watch and just wait for one student or two who comes to me at the end of the class and says, Professor Blank, I have a job choice. I really need your help. And I know what the conversation is not going to be. I've heard it for 10 years. What's the choice? I got this great offer from McKinsey. Wow, that's great. McKinsey's a great firm. What's your other opportunity? Oh, my roommates want me to join their startup. And I go, okay, you made your choice. And they go, don't you want to hear the startups? I said, no, you're working for McKinsey. Because if I ever heard you joined a startup, I'll make sure you never work in this valley again. Anybody understand why? McKinsey is a job. A startup is a calling. It's not a job. You can't join a startup. You got to want to do this. This is not like, some cruise ship. You're signing up for the Marine Corps or Delta Force here. And if you're not, you're joining a hobby. And you are going to be part of its failure, not as part of its success. So while we now have a methodology and process to make this happen, and we, now kind of you bring your dog and you have food and you break welcome, whatever, that's just because we're working your ass off. And if we're not doing that, then you are going to be beaten by someone like me, who's competing like a son of a bitch. So I just want to, I don't mean to be crude about it, but this is not, a fun job. This is, you are called to a passion. And everybody on the founding team and your early employees ought to be there, or you're going to lose them the first time. The going gets tough. And in a startup, the going gets tough quite often. And that's why you need committed early employees who believe in the vision, not because you paid them a lot. Does that?
Yeah,
sorry about the rant.
And on that note, there was a cable television show that announced today that there was a new reality TV show called Silicon Valley.
Oh,
So we'll look for that on Bravo TV. It's not a plug. We don't get anything for that. So. Okay, let's do one more. We got one more. One more. To the traditional business plan. So my current business plan is the same one when I got funding 2 years ago. It's awesome. My board of directors is totally chill. I have a carte blanche to spend money as I need. Plus, things are going so good, we cancel a lot of board meetings. Who is that? Who is that? Steve would be proud. Brad, are you here? Brad? Where's Brad? Gosh dang it, Brad. Okay, so tell us, why does the business plan, why does it have to evolve? And it didn't previously, or did it previously? Is that the mentality that people have always had?
So one of the things we now know after 50 years of doing startups is a couple things. One is no business plan survives first contact with customers. It's a big idea. Business plan, where did it come from? Well, a business plan came from what large companies do for their second, third, fourth, or nth follow-on product. It makes all the sense in the world for an existing company. Why? Because an existing company has customers. They could tell you who they are. They have a channel, a sales channel, distribution channel. They have all kinds of things that a startup doesn't. And in fact, they could actually write Appendix A, which is the revenue model, and not laugh hysterically. But in a startup, we kind of forgot, because we never really knew, just as an aside, what happened in the last 100 years to business is just kind of outstanding, and we never have any perspective. The first modern corporation was the East India Company, year 1600. And you could argue Greeks and Romans had companies, but really, if you squinted, you'd say the year 1600. Corporations evolved for 300 years. They learned how to organize, sales, marketing, they learned how to do accounting, until the year 1908. The president of Harvard looked around and noticed two things. One is the United States was going from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy, and needed professional managers. And two is there was 300 years of a body of knowledge on how to run companies that no one had ever put together in a professional course. And so Harvard put together a 2-year graduate course called the Masters of Business Administration. Very quickly copied throughout the U.S. and then throughout the world, because we needed shock troops of professional managers who knew how to execute, and the curriculum kind of emerged of HR and operations and strategy and finance, etc., that basically turned, 20th century into the American century. First industrializing the U.S., and then post-World War II internationalizing. But there really was no curriculum for startups. If you look at the curriculum of an MBA, it's how to execute a known business plan. It's about execution. But what all of you are doing in the first year is searching for a business model, not executing one. The mistake the first VCs did in Silicon Valley was take all the execution tools, how to write a business plan, 5-year income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, and kind of assume that somehow, like the cargo cult in the Pacific, if we kind of wrote it, it would happen. We just found out it doesn't work that way. What we missed, and we never had, was the equivalent to the MBA stack. We needed the entrepreneurial management stack. And that's been my contribution, Alexander Osterwalder's contribution, Eric Ries's contribution. We're giving you guys tools to start thinking about the search before you run for the execution tools for the planning. Does that make sense? And so how to write a business plan and all this other stuff, that's what you do after you find a set of customers and product market fit, and then you could write a plan all you want. But until then, the business plan, I still say, ought to be taught in colleges, but instead of wherever they're being taught now, we ought to just move them to the English department because they're the best examples of creative writing you're ever going to do at a university. Because okay, we'll goal seek to 100 million in year 5, okay. And I tell my students there's a secret Microsoft key combination they're still searching for to auto-generate that, business model. So that's the answer to the question.
Let's give Steve a big, huge round of applause. So let's, Chris, could you just grab those books and bring them in here? And let's just take 1 or 2 questions from the audience, and then we'll give away these books. Go ahead. Yeah, and I'll repeat it so that we get on tape.
When you're starting to talk to customers about your model and getting feedback, is there an approximate number of customers you can talk to, or is it just when you get to give them
49.
How much testing should you do with customers before you execute?
It's a killer question, and not to be facetious. So in the enterprise software business, when I was selling $1 million software packages, when I had 5 people buy $1 million unfinished, buggy, whatever, I said, we got something repeatable. You tell me that and you're building an iOS app, I'm going were you smoking something right now or yesterday? Because you're off by probably 3 orders of magnitude. And so it really is when the data starts repeating itself. So when you start seeing a repeatable pattern, then my first question is, okay, is it because we've been looking at the wrong archetype, or do we really have a repeatable signal? What you're looking for is a signal in the noise. And it depends on the industry and the segment. And it is a judgment call that you and your investors need to make. When do we think we understand the problem? When do we think we understand the solution that customers want? Great, now we're out test selling. Okay, by the way, and if it's a multi-sided market, are we comfortable enough just getting users excited without ever knowing, who the payers are going to be? The Fred Wilson model is get me 10 million users, we'll figure out monetization later. My model is you should be so lucky to have that problem. I want you to be talking to payers. So different investors will have different strategies about what I want you to test, how much and how many. But it's a great question to ask. And by the way, you can also ask by proxy. If I'm an X business, what are the guys around me kind of when did they start seeing a pattern? Does that answer your question?
So you look at the universe and you try to create a large enough sample that you might be
confident. And then, because I'm paranoid, then I start worrying about, did I ask the right question? Right? Am I optimizing a local maximum or a global maximum? And because, again, there are no right answers here, this is what I call the fingertip feel, or the instincts of an experienced entrepreneur with enough pattern recognition skills. That is, you have enough recognition skills in your industry and domain, and then can apply some of those patterns to what you're seeing here. This is what makes great VCs. They don't necessarily have to be intelligent, but they do have to be great pattern recognizers, both for teams, for people, and for business patterns.
So one more in the very back. Yeah, go ahead. What's the worst, or what's the main incorrect way that I'm trying to rephrase that, but
oh yeah, customer
what
development.
do you see most frequently as far as implementation
So
being done wrong?
it goes something like this. Oh yeah, customer development. I hired a bunch of employees to go do that for me. If you're not laughing, all right, so you missed that. You can't hire somebody to go do that. If you're the founder and you're not out of the building, I don't care what you call it, it isn't customer development. It might be focus group, it might be whatever. Customer development is you are hearing this stuff directly. And you know, even if you're the engineering co-founder, you're being drug out to deal with a darn customer, you know, more often than you want to. And yeah, we're going to let you go back and code and whatever, but man, we're putting those customers in your face. And telling me that you hired, you know, some customer development team and you're not part of it, you know, please don't. I'm going to come and find you and take that title away. Or the other one. Let me give you the two. Oh yeah, customer development. My head of sales is doing that. Well, let me just remind you, if you're really doing customer development, you don't have sales or marketing or biz dev until you've found a repeatable and scalable business model. What you have is a customer development team, right? And then you get to call them, you know, sales, marketing, or biz dev. But people tend to default to their titles. So if I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing and I got a title sales, even though you told me I'm supposed to be doing customer development, I'm going to try to get an order. If my business card actually said customer development and I come back with an order, I know you're going to kick my teeth in because that was not my job. I don't want the order. I need data. I need to understand what is it we need to learn out there. Does that answer your question?
Let's give Steve a big, huge round of applause.